Hello and welcome back to A Bit of Curiosity. I'm joined today by someone I used to work with who's become a really good friend, Damian Dayton. Damian is a husband, father of two crazy boys, lover of Jesus, and the founder of a creative powerhouse. He's made some of the best performing video campaigns out there. His life has been learning and living creatively. He loves to tell a great story and translate that to brands that connect with consumers. If you aren't laughing at his videos, hopefully you're chuckling at his dad jokes. He might give us a couple of those today. Damian, welcome. I'm so excited to have this time to chat, man. It's been a minute.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I was excited for a chance to catch up with you, and it was really fun. I really share some of the days we had together, like in New York, working on projects and working on some fun things together. And thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for coming on. I consider you one of the most one of the greatest creative minds that I know. You're always drawing, you're always doodling, you're always thinking up great stories, and I'm impressed by your level of creativity. And I'd love to kind of tell us a little bit. What does your creative process look like, Damien?
Long answer and short answer is always be creating, always be exploring and wandering. I think creativity is not as much a talent as it is a skill. And the more you do it, you can get good at it. Just like I think anybody can become a runner, but it's painful for me to start, you know? And if we're worried about what people think about us and the crazy ideas, a point of tension between my wife and I is definitely, she's like, but won't that be weird? I'm like, yeah, but it'll be awesome. And so I think from a young age, we are definitely think about your relationship with your children, how often you're like, stop doing that. That's weird. And like, why? That weird is okay. I don't want you like hurting people, but doing weird things is kind of what makes kids amazing. And that's nobody makes me laugh as consistently as my children, and they're not comedians, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's tapping into that childlike part of you that wonders and asks what if. We often say that there's two really important in any great brainstorm, and if you want to create something amazing, there's really two important mindsets. One is a what if mindset, and what is a but how mindset. And the problem is those can't be there's both aren't invited to the room at the same time. And this is the other central conflict between my wife and I. I'm like, what if we did this neighborhood thing and we're doing a pumpkin walk and invite 400 people in our neighborhood to it? And she's like, but how are we going to plan it? But once she's on board with the idea, no one's better at helping me execute it as we break it down to, okay, how are we going to invite people? How are we going to get people involved? How are we going to, but you need to have time in the room to think of those big ideas without, butting them down. I have an example I like to use. If you're going to go to the moon, first you have to decide we're going to go to the moon. But if that first conversation is like, yeah, but there's no oxygen up there, and it just ends there, instead of we're going to go to moon, how are we going to escape Earth's atmosphere? How are we going to get oxygen? Those all become problems to solve. So that's big. But I have this theory about creativity, and it's based off of Aristotle's understandings of telling stories in the Poetics, that there's 5 acts to a play. And I think there's 5 acts to the creative process. And I think the first one is inception, when you decide you're going to do something. The second, and you're like very clear, I'm like, hey, I want to accomplish this big thing. Then ingestion, where you're taking in all the information. That's like you're introducing characters in a story and you're eating all the information that you can. And then act 3 is rising action in the story. And that's when the idea incubates and you see what happens and you pitch the idea to different friends and you get little feedback, but you're not really forming anything, you know? In cooking, this is when you're letting stuff simmer and you're wandering. My best ideas happen in the shower, in the car, as I'm waking up, as I'm falling asleep, which is why I take naps, because that gives me 2 more idea sessions.
Yeah, there you go.
And then you have to compose it and then present something. And so Aristotle tells a story, they're like the introduction of the characters, and that's the inception and the ingestion, and the rising action for me is that incubation. And then you present something, and that's composition. It's not an I word. I have this thing about, and that's when you present it to people, so that's why my sketchbooks are full of doodles, and none of those, I have bookcases full of them that nothing's finished. They're ideas and concepts and trying this, then trying that, and eventually present something. And at that is the best that creative idea will ever get. And then all the edits happen to it, and then it's got to be edited. And then you end up with the anticlimax, but you ended up here when you started here. So you go on this journey up this big hill and down. And then this is the starting point for your next idea. And you do it again. In between composition, I always sleep on a good idea because it gets better in the nighttime. It gets better when you're not staring at the problem, when it's staring at you while you sleep. And it's like, what if we did this twist? So the sad thing is we tell our clients, it takes me about a month to write a script. What I don't tell them is it only takes about 5 hours to write a script. And those 5 hours might happen 30 minutes after they leave. And it might happen in the middle of the night before they show up. But how do you quantify the work that comes with the wandering and the reading something only tangentially related and ingesting pop culture? And because I don't think, this is a little bit spiritual for me, I don't think you can ever create out of nothing. And we've created this term creative, and like, this guy just comes up with stuff. And I'm not coming up with stuff, I'm putting stuff together, And so in order to put stuff together, you have to have a lot of stuff. And so I'm reading and watching stuff and talking to people. And I don't think you can be creative until you've had some life experience, And I think you can be creative in a way I can't, because you've just had an incredible array of life experiences, from starting businesses to traveling the country with your family and seeing parts of the country that nobody is, that you can create things that I could never hope to create because you've gathered life experiences that I don't have. And so, part of it's what we choose to ingest, and part of that digestion process. So there it is in a nutshell. There's my very scientific breakdown of my creative process. But most of the time it looks like doodling while people are talking to me, because I'm trying to listen and also tap into that unconscious part of my brain and seeing where it's going.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I think sometimes it's like, well, phones become a major distraction to that, right? Because instead of doodling, instead of leaning into the creative process, we're just consuming, right? And that becomes a problem. But I think about me growing up, right? I've had a really hard time considering myself a creative person, even though I can look back at my life and be like, okay, yeah, I'm absolute, I'm creative. I'm best when I'm building. I had this conversation on a previous podcast episode, and I just admitted, okay, I'm a creative, right? I've got journals full of stuff I've written, right? But there's another element of this. And okay, so where I was going is, back in elementary school, I was always reprimanded for not paying attention. It's like, Jeremy, what are you doing? Why are you drawing? Pay attention. Stop drawing on the desk. No, I'm trying to lean into my create, right? And that's one thing that I've always noticed about, Damian's always drawing. Damian's always scribbling in his notebook, right? You'll be sitting in front of a client of a business that's doing $100 million plus a year, and you're there to woo them and win their business, but you're just there doodling, right? Because it was part of your creative process. And that's what I think part of what makes you great, right? Because you're not afraid. The thing that I love about Damian Dayton is Damian is not the corporate speaking guy, right? You're not going to sit there in a suit and tie and I'm going to schmooze you and woo you, right? No, I'm a genius at what I do, and you got to deal with the process if you want the killer product.
I don't know if I see myself that way, because I do love a suit and tie, but I don't wear one regularly. But yeah, I've just realized what works for me. I was the same as you in elementary. I got in trouble for drawing while the teacher was talking all the time. And my son does. And we were talking about this. He always has some learning challenges. And I've asked for interventions at the school. Allow him to draw while you're talking. That will allow him to listen. If my hands aren't busy, and I was just recently diagnosed. It was 5 years ago that I was diagnosed with ADHD. And I didn't have the diagnosis as a child because I could sit quietly in my desk. I didn't have the H part. I wasn't running around, but my mind was. And I just learned well, this is what I have to do. So when I hit college, I swore off line paper. All of my notes, I just bought sketchbooks, and I took sketchbooks. And then people started buying my notes from me. In my pre-med classes, they're like, oh, you've illustrated the mechanism of hydrolyzing this carbon chain. And I'm like, well, I'm just taking notes. I'm just trying to make sense of the world. And so that's how I make sense of the world, you know?
Yeah.
But I think some people say, well, like, I can't draw, so I'm not a creative. Like, I can't build anything out of wood. If you have me join two pieces of wood at a right angle, I'm horrible at that. And I think too often we judge ourselves or other based on like, well, if you're creative, you must be able to make all things. Like, no, I make certain types of things. I make doodles, I make videos, I write dad jokes, I I think of marketing strategies, and I think of crazy things to do in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and
Right.
I'm very creative about finding fun ways to make my kids do stuff I need them to do. I really shine there, being fun dad was, you know, enough that it's like a detriment. I'm like, no, I need these kids to learn how to do stuff because it's hard. I can't, if I turn everything into a game, they'll enter the workforce. I'm like, they're not making work fun at all, Dad. Like, yeah, that's kind of on you to make. And I just realized I listen better. I listen deeper and more intently if I'm in the process of creating while I do it. And I think that's a little bit religious too. I think very few religious traditions have this concept that we have a creator as part of who we are, is that we are also creators, in our eternal vision of things, you know? And
Yeah,
so,
I firmly believe it's innate within us, right? Like it's kind of part of our divine center, right? Like we all are creative by nature, and it's a matter of whether or not we can lean into that creative, right? Like because you talk about like watching your children, and I think if we look at any child, and if we take away the tablet, we take away the phone, right? Like the things that they can accomplish, and even let me digress a little bit, right? Like Peter Diamandis writes about this, I think in his book Abundance, where they went to a village in Africa and they handed them Android tablets, and by like the third or fourth day, one of the kids had completely hacked into the back end and was redeveloping it, and they had Wi-Fi and tablets, and they'd never used them before, and it was just like kids could figure it out, right? Like and I think like there's just this innate like creative ability within children, and it starts from a very young age. But society tends to squelch that. And the interesting thing is we praise so many of these individuals, right? Like Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, right? Like um Leonardo da Vinci, right? Shakespeare, right? Like let's go down the list.
for
How many of them were
filmmakers,
praised,
yeah.
right? Like filmmakers across the board, actors, right? Like actors were like Jim Carrey was the goof off in school, right? Like all of these individuals, like we praise them, we love them, we flood the box office, we buy their books, we buy their products. But then when it comes down to like actually being vulnerable and sharing our creativity with the world, we're like, nope,
Mhm.
nope, I want to keep that to myself, right? Like, or no, you can't, like, or in school, right? Like, school is kind of unfortunately, one of the biggest diminishers of creativity. Um,
Well, and if you
and
want to do a good test of that, like watch somebody do something great and tell them that and watch how they react. Like this happened to me. Like I'm doodling during church and somebody says, "Oh, you're an artist." What's your response? Well, not really. I just do. Oh, are you a writer? Because you're writing in your journal? Like, no, I just write. Right. Like we don't want, we're so scared of telling people that we're going to put ourselves out there as an artist. I think we need to like normalize it. I'm an artist. I'm just not where I want to be at. Like, why can't we
yeah,
say that? Why can't we're creating in whatever it is that we're doing, whether we're making up our recipes, what we're making that night, or how we're creating the culture around us. We're all creating, and the interesting thing, so we've talked about this before, but for the sake of your listeners, I was headed to medical school. That was the path that I was on. And I found it so deeply depressing at one point. Like I'm doing well in my pre-med classes. I started making a list of doctors who are also artists. Like it hit throughout history, right? So that I could tell myself I could be a doctor and still do this. And what I discovered is when you find that intersection of doctors who are artists, you find that almost all of them were multidisciplinary. So James Audubon, founder of the Audubon Society, who drew
yeah,
birds, and Samuel Morse, inventor of the Morse code. Like, so he wasn't famous for being a doctor or an artist, but they became famous for something else because I think it is the studying the interesting parts of the world that makes your brain start doing interesting things. I don't think they were necessarily multiple disciplinary geniuses. I don't think they were polymaths, you know. And I realized that college got a lot less interesting once I picked a major, and a lot more came out of it when I was like, "Ooh, that class sounds fun," and that class sounds
Yeah.
fun. And we fill our minds with interesting things. And one thing I love about our theology, I mean, I'm only going to say this because you mentioned it in your introduction, so I assume that religion and belief is part of what we're talking about, as well as creativity.
You can go wherever you need to or want
Well,
to here,
I
Damien.
just,
Absolutely.
there's a lot of faith groups that say, like, you know, dinosaurs aren't real or whatever. And I just say, what a greater testament to a deity, a creator who was having some fun making, you know, I don't know why the dinosaurs existed, but you can't look at those as every single child is delighted by dinosaurs. I believe in you know, if I was creating a world, like, yeah, let's see what if we made a lizard and gave it wings and let it fly and made one that could swim underwater? It's like, oh yeah, I forgot, I've got to create humankind. Well, let's start over again and let's make some humans. And
Yeah,
right, like, I don't know a lot of details in there, but I've got to
right.
believe there's a part of me that believes that 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 our creator enjoyed creating the world. Like, there's no other reason for beauty to exist in the world, purely for enjoyment. Like, why does a sunset exist? I can tell you the scientific principles between why the light is bent at the end of the day, but why do we enjoy it? Like, there's no evolutionary reason for us to enjoy beauty like that, the beauty of nature. And artists spend their lives trying to capture that, and usually poorly. You know, I'm sure you've done. I know you're a mountaineer and a hiker, and I know you've been on some amazing trails, and you've looked out and you're just like, what have I done to deserve this? Like, what have
Absolutely.
I done to earn this that we have around us? So,
Not like just simple things, right? Like waking up in the morning, sitting here in my office that overlooks the lake here, and just seeing the golden glow just shine off of the reeds and glisten off of the lake, right? Like it's just this moment of awe, right? Like my first podcast guest, Joe Morton, talked about just living in awe and the importance and value of that, right? And I think that lends itself to both our creative process, but also to who we are as humans, right? Like as
mhm.
you mentioned, right? Like there is no like evolutionarily, like there's no reason for us to like sit here and watch a sunset and just hang out at like on the beach and watch the sun go down along the horizon line and see it glisten off of the ocean and change the colors of the sky and just be like, okay, this is like
And I would even argue there's a
amazing.
evolutionary disadvantage. It's like, that's when the biting bugs come out. That's when your vision is diminished. Like, you're sitting enjoying the sunset, you're going to be victim to predators. Right? Like,
Yeah,
you're
because they're
silhouetted up
nocturnal.
against the
They're gonna
sky.
come out and eat me when I'm on my
They're
walk
coming
back
out
to
in the
my
sunset.
hut. Like,
Yeah, but we do, and it gives me an immense amount of pleasure. You know, and Picasso once said, you know, his measure, and I actually don't love Picasso. That's a whole side thing, but he said some interesting things. He said when he's judging one of his pieces of work, he holds up a piece of creation to it, like an apple, and if it doesn't clash, then he accepts it as good art. Like, if I can hold up some of God's creation next to my work, I'll hold up an apple, and if it doesn't clash, I'm like, okay, that's beautiful. I can move forward with that. And so I do think of creation. It's fun, it's enjoyable, but it is kind of an act of worship for me. It's like, I'm not always thinking about it that deeply and that religiously, but it kind of is. You know, there's a tribe of Native Americans in Mexico, or Native Mexicans, indigenos, whatever term you prefer, the Huichol Indians, and they make these really beautifully intricate sand paintings. And I was doing a travel show, and I was met some of the Indians and this art dealer who was selling their sand paintings, but it's part of their religious, you know, and sometimes they'll take hallucinogenics and do these intricate sand paintings, pouring out these colors of sand. I'm like, and I was talking to the art dealer, I'm like, aren't you selling their religious relics by selling me these things that are part of their religious? And he said, no, this is just, to them, this is sand. It is the act of creation that is the worship and is the communion with God. Like, the experience you have creating is your communion with God, but the piece to them is just sand. They usually just wipe it away. We convinced them, like, let's spray it and put some glue on it. We'll keep it. And now we can support your village, but you can keep doing your act of creation. They don't value the artifact itself, you know?
Yeah.
And I think there's something really beautiful about that idea, you
I
know?
I agree. Like that's a gorgeous sentiment. Just this divine connection through creation, right? Like I look at like a meditation practice or a yoga practice or a journaling practice, right? Like those are all some connective practices, right? Like you're trying to connect with self, maybe you're trying to connect with a deity, a god, some higher power, right? Like but it's just bringing this like almost creative because you're being attentive to the body, right? The body that you've brought up, that you're trying to keep healthy, that God has created for you, and you're just trying to intermingle and interconnect these. And we find so much. There's a lot of people that find worship through that. There's people that find worship through being in the mountains, right? Like, but by creating something, right, like a sand painting of some kind, and but that journey, that process of creation as a form of worship is that's a beautiful sentiment, right? Like
Yeah.
that's lovely.
Yeah. Oh, I love in our religious tradition, we have painters that we had art missionaries that were sent to learn art. But there's a very early LDS artist that was friends with my grandmother, Minerva Teichert, and gave up on her art career because she felt like she needed to use her art in the service of her faith, and came back to the West. She studied under Robert Henry, who's one of the 10, and the Chicago Institute of Art, and was invited to go paint at a very prestigious art school in France, and felt like I needed to come back and paint the Mormon story. And I think that's fascinating for me. But I also think like, well, how am I using that? You know, I make commercials, and that's, boy, next to being a car salesman, there aren't many things that people like look down upon. I feel like my professional goals, like my personal mission statement is three things. Like I want to take care of my family. I want to create beautiful things, and I want to make the earth a little bit better. So I have to be careful about how I sell and what I sell. That's a struggle. I'm not 100% proud of everything I've done, but being engaged in that struggle and trying to find a way to sell products that you believe in, you think finding the nobility and goodness in those things. And I think anything that you do as work can be that way. So I mentioned selling cars, and my brother was a car salesman, and he got me into it. I did it one summer. It's one of my dirtiest secrets. He was like, he's like, watch what's happening right now. We're sitting in the dealership, and a family pulls up in a sedan, and like 7 people pile out of the car, and the car's obviously not in great shape. He's like, look at all the salesmen right now. And they're all like, they had nothing to do, but all of a sudden they got really busy in a hurry, and nobody wanted. And he's like, I can either look at this job as I'm selling them cars, or I can look at it as I'm going to help that family find a better, safer way to travel as a family and get to work. Because when you're poor, you can't afford a broken car. You know, you can't afford to not get to work. And
Right.
usually several jobs for the family. And he's like, and if I look at my job as service, I win no matter. And he quickly became the top salesman. But he looked at selling cars as, oh, I'm serving people every day. I'm creating beauty, and I'm giving them the things that they need. And it is a mind shift. I think you can see that in whatever you do. I think whatever you could find creation and find the beauty in the numbers, creating jobs, creating marketing campaigns, or just creating.
Yeah, and I love the narrative there, right? Because like I think a lot of times we tend to think of like, okay, creativity is like I'm drawing for Pixar, or I'm writing stories. I'm the next, right? Like I'm writing Harry Potter, whatever it is, right? Like that's creativity, right? Like I'm a film producer. But like the example of your brother, right? Like he's creating a better life, a better experience for that individual, right? Like and
Mm-hmm.
and in an industry where like you're like, I'm second to only car salesman in building commercials, right? Like we put car salesman at like, okay, this is like the worst career.
Yeah. Well,
But you
think of
can
people,
find
well, advertisers as liars, right? That's kind of the reputation. But
yes.
like, if we do our job, like a dishonest advertiser doesn't get very far. I say that great advertising doesn't work without a great product. And it just, and I've seen this in truth, like a great ad campaign with a bad product just amplifies that company's, just speeds up that company's demise.
Yeah.
Like it introduces people a lot faster to a product that sucks. I worked on one app in our early days. We used to just, they were just launching and the app had problems, but we loved the idea of what they were offering. We didn't get a chance to really test it. Like, well, it's not ready yet. And they launched and within a week had 100,000 or 100,000 one-star reviews. You know, we did our job. We drove a lot of people to hate their product.
Yeah, you put a lot of rocket fuel into a rocket and that thing will take off. But if there's leaks in the tank, that thing will explode.
Yeah.
And yeah. Yeah, it's so going back to kind of the vulnerability around creation, right? Like, so taking it from like, okay, I've created something to now like, okay, putting it out for the public to see. Now I get to be criticized, ridiculed, judged, reviewed, rated. How, like, how do we transition, right? Like, how do we be brave enough? How do we have the courage to throw it out there?
That's a really good one. So, it's easier than ever technically to put your stuff out there, but it's also easier than ever to care what people think about it. Like, yeah. I could put my stuff in a museum and walk away and never care, but people would come and see it and like it or not like it. And I wouldn't know unless I read the reviews. And the pat answer is to say, well, just don't care about what people think. Problem is I really care what people think. And this is the division that I try to make. I care deeply about what people think, but they don't get to have a vote in my life, right? I want people to love what I make. I'm going to learn from that, but I cannot let them decide who I'm going to be, And my wife and I came up with that phrase when we were planning our wedding. We were like, there's a lot of people we care what they think as we're planning our wedding. There's family members that have strong opinions about things. We just had to decide, well, we care what they have to think, but who gets a vote in this? Like, okay,
Yeah.
They really want us to have a traditional wedding cake, but it's our money. So we're going to do a table full of pies instead. Is that weird? Yeah, but it's what we want. So that's what we get. We get what we want. There's an illustrator I love on TikTok, and he does these very primitive drawings, and most of his comments are just hate. And he just loves engaging with them. People are like, I could draw like that. And he says, awesome. Why don't you? Pick up a pen and start drawing today. Draw bad drawings with me, He's like, and he was doing very well for himself, selling both his art and making product with it. He's like, you've got your processes and this is mine. And that is where we struggle with is feeling like it's rejection. And I feel like its core, that is the difference between the pride and humility that we talk about a lot. And being humble is knowing the source of the value of your work. And it is somewhere between me and my creator and not on how people think. But how people think gives me an opportunity to learn. Because sometimes I'm creating something so people will have a reaction. If they have a very different reaction than what I intended, that's an opportunity to learn. But if they're like, well, like you, Damian, and your garbage, like, oh, but you're wrong because I'm awesome. And I'm awesome in this very different way than what you're looking for. I mean, and nothing prepared me more for that than being single for a very long time. And I say, like, you've got to know if you're fish eggs, you've got to deeply believe that you're caviar. And everybody else like, ooh, this is stinky, this is gross. And you're like, yeah, but I'm caviar. Not everybody's going to like it. But the people that do, they're going to be like, this is worth $1 million. Because you're never going to, the only way to not be hated is to not do anything. If you have any degree of success in this life, you will find haters. I discovered that like really early in high school. I had the job of making the morning announcements, and I thought, great. My dad was really disappointed in me that I didn't run for like president. I'm like, no, I want to. Don't you get it? They're giving me a microphone every day. I get to say stuff to people every day, and I would get in trouble because the drama teacher would write an announcement. She wanted it written as wrote, but I would make jokes.
You'd ad-lib it.
And then I was talking to somebody who knew somebody who went to our high school, and he's like, oh yeah, he hates you. I'm like, how can you hate me? He's like, oh, he hates hearing you every morning. I'm like, yeah, there are good people that do. But boy, I'm having fun.
Yeah. I think right there, that last statement, right? Like, I think that's so like, if we can lean into that, right? Like, okay, like I'm having fun. I'm a creator and I'm having fun creating. And whether or not people interact, right? Like I'm gonna throw this podcast episode out there, right? Like I don't know how many people are gonna watch it. I don't know how many subscribers I'm gonna end up with, right? Like I'm not looking to build fame or fortune off of this, but it's a matter of like, okay, this is an opportunity for me to kind of connect with friends and people that I don't know and learn a little bit more, right? Like and maybe develop some skills along the way, but create something fun. And
Yep.
I'm having fun doing it, right? Like um I'm sure there will be days where if I look at the viewer count and it's like, oh, that's all that viewed this, right? Like I'm gonna be a
Yep.
little disappointed, right? Like I'm not gonna lie, right? like
Well, yeah, you
I
have
think
your big
like we
goals.
want our stuff to be recognized, right? That's who we are as inherently as humans. But I think, but learning to like lean into that fun, right? Like, okay, like this is fun. I want, if you've got a goal to write a book, go write your book, right? Start writing a few words, right? Like just free write. Get up every morning and spend 15 minutes free writing and then start compiling and then start building out what that looks like. And as long as it stays fun, keep doing it. If it loses its fun, then maybe you need to shift and look at something else. But I think that that's such a powerful aspect of the creative process is what are we having fun doing?
Yeah. Well, and sooner or later, no matter what creative thing you're doing, does become work. I think one of the best books about this is Stephen Pressfield wrote a really small book. My brother recommended to me, and it's just awesome. If you're creating in any field, I recommend it. It's called, instead of The Art of War, it's called The War of Art. But each chapter is like 5 pages long, and it's just inspirational. But Stephen King quotes it. My brother used it as he was writing his comic book, and it was just like, yeah, you get on this to have fun, and you have to lean into it. It's like the thing you also want to teach your kids is they learn that they love basketball. Eventually, they get hit a wall where it's not just fun.
Right.
That, but I care enough that I'm going to keep doing the hard thing, even though it's not easy fun. There's different types of fun, but that's also, as I talked about the creative act, that story arc that you've seen before, that peak is like when the idea is great and you have to do the hard work of refining it, because that's going to make it physical. That's going to birth it into the world. But like right now, I'm absolutely having fun. And I really didn't know, like, I have no idea how many people are going to listen to this conversation, but the opportunity for me to talk with Jeremy in a format, how often do we say, like, let's sit and talk for an hour?
Yeah. It
That would
doesn't
be worth
happen.
it.
Not net like it does not happen enough in our society in general, right? Like it needs to happen more.
For some
And
reason, we feel like
you
it
and I
has
need to have these
to.
conversations
Yeah.
more, right? Like even without the mic and without the camera, right? like
I think especially men, we don't have that opportunity. My wife will be on like Marco Polo, or she'll talk and just have these hour-long conversations every day. We've got to get stuff done, but connection is also hugely important. And guys,
absolutely.
it's this bad that if we feel like we want to talk to somebody, we feel like we have to do it over a meal because, like, well, I've got to eat, so let's talk while we're doing that, because I can't just say let's just sit. Hey, let's just talk, and I don't have any objective.
You know,
Let's
that's fascinating,
enjoy.
right? Because like how often is it like, hey, let's grab lunch sometime, right? Like that's the common phrase you hear. Like that's like, okay, let's go grab lunch sometime. Or it tends to be let's grab a drink, let's grab a coffee, right? Like these are common phrases, but it's like, well, let's hey, come on over. I've got a couch out on the deck. Like let's just hang out. Like, come
Yeah, hey,
over, let's just
Sunsets going to
chat.
be awesome tonight. Come over and let's just chat. Like,
Yeah,
because there doesn't have to be any purpose. But I have the resistance to that. I'm like, I've got to get home but like, there's 24 hours in a day. I only get one lunch, you know? And when we go
right.
out to eat, it's going to be more calories and it's going to cost more money and stuff like that. But what I really want to do is, man, I really like you as a person. I don't want to marry you, but I really like you as a person. Let's spend some time, because I really like spending some time. You have interesting things to say, and I feel a part of me. I feel like the facets of our personality are sculpted by the people we interact with. Like, part of me comes out when I'm talking with you that I really like, and I like that person. That's a creative act because we create conversation too.
Absolutely. No, like I think creating friendship, creating connection, creating community, right? Like again, we're using the words create, right? Because that's exactly what we're doing, right? And that like that's what we can all lean into that, right? We can create better communities. We can get to know our neighbors better. We can create these spaces where we feel safe and we can talk and we can connect. I don't do it often enough, but in my neighborhood, I've tried to start a book club, and I feel like I'm the only one really facilitating this, right? So if I don't stay on it, it doesn't happen. So it's been a few months since we got together, but last time we got together, we invited a couple other guys, and I said I just threw out there, I was like, hey, I'm gonna smoke a brisket, come on over, right? Like,
Well,
and
that's meat will get smoked meat will get bring the boys to the yard.
And so I knew that I could get them that way, right? Like I could
Yeah,
create
forget the
this space
milkshake.
where we
Yeah,
could come and we could spend 2 hours, right? Like, because the nice thing is when you bring, like, going out to lunch, you know it's going to be 45 minutes, maybe an hour max, right? Like, and then you're going to kind of get the table turn, right? Like, you got to get back to the office. But in the
yeah,
evening, right? Like, hey, I'm gonna smoke some meat, right? Like, we're gonna do pizza. Like, I love what you do, right? Like you invite people over to your house on a regular basis and make pizzas. And what's everybody doing while you're making pizza? You can only make one pizza at a time, and these are personal sized pizzas. You gotta sit and chat.
yeah. And my main problem is that I'm running out making the pizzas, and I'm left my wife. I'm like, oh, she's doing. I really like making pizzas. Like she's getting the fun part right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, my attempts in my neighborhood, some of them have fallen flat, like book club. And the interesting thing, I did a Dungeons and Dragons group in my neighborhood, and it was kind of pulling teeth to get guys there. And then once we did it, like 3 or 4 guys that haven't like been around much, don't come to things much, like sat and stayed for like 45 minutes after, and just like you could tell they were just like this craving of this connection. That was like the point. I didn't want to go slay dragons. And my dad was like, well, haven't you won Dungeons and Dragons yet? I'm like, that's not the point of the game. It's a game that gives you a reason to sit around and tell stories to each other where you're participating in the story, you
I
know?
I laugh because I ask my daughter that question all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Have you
not
won
into
yet?
Dungeons and Dragons. I haven't ever played. I know you tried to get me to play a couple times when we were working
Yeah.
together, but my daughter plays, and I give her a hard time. I'm like, who won?
Well, I
No,
just
who
got into it
wins?
like 3 or 4 years ago because an employee got a bunch of us and they were having so much fun. And now like
Yeah,
people said, but it would be like, hey, haven't you won Minecraft yet? And you can technically win Minecraft, but it's amazing that it is like this low pixel, such a simple concept game. And like there is 2 decades of people that if you were born during those decades, there's no more important game than that for them. And because it's a digital sandbox. And I think
yeah,
we've been talking about phones and tablets have come up a couple times. And my wife is concerned about screen time. And I showed her this study I found the other day by Jean Twenge. She's out of SDSU and one of the leading researchers on the benefits or the negative problems of screen time and specifically social media. And they were able to parse it out. Like too much screen time is on par with eating too much potatoes, but it depends on what you're doing on your screen time. If it's social media, that's dangerous, and a different researcher said, somebody asked how much screen time should we give our kids? And she said, well, that depends how much crack cocaine should you give our kids? But she was talking about social media specifically. We've seen a
right.
huge suicide. But can I introduce my kids to a digital painting app and I can feel differently about them, or teaching them how to code on an app can I let them create? And my wife and I have this conversation. Like, I really think we're measuring screen time, but we should treat it differently if they're sandboxing in Minecraft versus watching a YouTuber scream at Minecraft. Like, those are two very different things, you
Yeah,
know? Like, I love when my kids play Lego because it's a toy that demands a discipline to play with it. Like, you have to, okay, I'm gonna let you play with this toy, but you got to build it first and then you can play with it. So it demands them to put in a little bit of work with it. And so I love that sort of thing versus a mindless activity. And I think screen time can mean different things. And it's less about even what you watch. And if like my son's like, well, I want to watch something, but I don't want you asking my questions. I'm like, oh, if you want screen time, I'm going to sit with you and we're going to talk about it. Then it becomes a meaningful experience, right? Whether
mm-hmm.
you're watching Simpsons or the screaming YouTuber or a deep, deep film because there's a human connection part of it. Um, and out of that, you're creating something. Also, you're creating meaning out of this story, or is there a life lesson there? Or is it just a new shared joke that you have?
Yeah, it's fascinating to me. Like you bring up Minecraft, right? Like I I've got an 18-year-old down to a 12-year-old that love Minecraft, right? Like my 18-year-old son, him and his friends while they're in high school would go into their worlds together and they would build these worlds and they all had narrative, right? Like it was like, and he's like, I shit, I digress. I was gonna label like he's not a geek, right? Like this, I'm not,
Well,
but
I
like,
am. Yeah, there's this realm between geek and nerd, and that has gotten really big, and it's like that's where you want to be, somewhere in that on that spectrum of nerd
but
to
he's
geek.
but he's more he lean like he's a theater nerd, right? Like yes, but he's not a theater nerd. Like he was kind of the jock in theater, like, and that's just kind
Yeah.
of. But he's so well rounded, and I think a lot of that has to do with travel. I think travel played a big part in shaping his life and who he is, right, and what his interests are. Um, and we can get into that another time, right? Like just the benefits and power of traveling the world and seeing different things. But it's fascinating to watch him because like he's kind of like he's a strong kid, like he's built well. If I ever put him in football, he probably would have been a decent tight end or wide
Mhm.
receiver. I didn't want the concussions. I didn't want the brain damage. I kept him out of football. Not that football's bad. Like I know there's a lot of people that are
Surprising
listening
because
that
I
still love
do. I
football.
was
But but he loves basketball, right? But he was never really good enough to play on the high school team. But he played rec league all
Mhm.
growing up, right? And so he's kind of like he lives this like kind of jock basketball, but like he loves Minecraft with his friends who are also kind of like him, right? Like, and it's fast and like, but it's
I
fascinating
bet
to me
like
that it's not just
90% of
mindless,
his
right? They're creating this narrative. It's this story. It's this world. It's like it lends itself to this just internal, like we've talked about, right? This innate desire to create, but then they add elements to story. This is what happens here. This is what lives here, right? Like, and it's all just, yeah, I love the narrative around it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, well, and you think about this goes back to our beginning of our conversation. Like, I would bet that 70 to 80% of his classmates, not just his friends, like whatever they're into, also play Minecraft. It is this very interest agnostic game. People do lots of different things with it. I just know that this cultural thing that every kid, like it's gonna from this generation, is gonna have make Minecraft references for the rest of their life. And who knows, it may become the Lego of the future, right? But there's this point about we naturally create stories to create meaning, and we want to play, and we can take a serious thing. And like, I know they want me to go on this quest, but I want to play in the sandbox. I want to build a desert village, or I want to build into this cave, and seeing where that goes. There's an interesting thing happen. I know you look at me and you think this is a guy that's really into ultimate fighting, but I kind of am. But I don't feel like I identify with the culture very much. But there's this interesting movement that's happening in ultimate fighting right now where fighters are no longer sparring. And I was reading this or watching a little video on the psychology of it. And they said, like, when you spar, you're like doing all these fights to prepare for the fight. But when our brain is in fight or flight, we're no longer learning, we're reacting. So sparring plays a role, but they found that if you go to like Cuba, you saw how they dominated in some of the areas of the Olympics, and their boxers have always been great. If you go see a Cuban gym, the way they spar, they're all in a crowded room. They're not in a ring, and they're going like at 20% speed, and they're just kind of. It looks like they're playing, And think about the
Yeah,
way that animals learn to fight. They're playing and wrestling, and like because the stakes get lowered, you're having fun, but really what's going on is you're learning. You're finding opportunities to do things that the opponent doesn't see, but
interesting.
you're not worried about getting hurt and you're not worried about hurting your friend because you're usually not training against your eventual opponent and stuff. And they feel like learning is accelerated. I'll send you the video. But learning, because it's not really about fighting. It's that learning is accelerated when we believe it's play. when we believe, and I had an art teacher who would say this, he's like, we're not gonna learn anything today, but we might find out a few things. As you'd go through like famous artists through history, you would like, they'd have voices and you'd be taught, get a joke about every painting that we saw. And instead of approaching it with reverence of like, this is this beautiful masterpiece, it made it funny. And now I can walk into any museum in the world and guess 75% of the artists probably, because we had so much fun finding out about stuff. Like, I feel like I'm in museums and running into old friends, you know? I think that's true about almost everything. If you want to be an effective soccer coach, find the games that the kids will like playing while you're at practice, where there's a soccer ball at their feet, you know, rather than teaching them. Like, nobody wants a lecture.
That's
And, you know,
yeah,
and
I love that sentiment, right? Like, and especially with like how much that art class stuck with you, right? Like, and like I think back to my like in high school, I hated history class, right? Like, hated it. It
Mhm.
was all memorization. It was rote memorization. It was facts, it was figures. It was just doldrums, right? Like, usually it was the
Oh,
football coach or whatever teaching it, right? Like, and it was just like it was like, okay, we're like reading out of the textbook again today. Like, it was awful. I hated it.
and the worst assignments were like, read the chapter and answer these 5 questions. And they weren't important questions, but they were like, find where they said the word Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. You know, what year was that? And like, it's a word search. It's not, I'm not learning here. It's a word
Yeah.
search. Yeah.
Yeah. And then my freshman year in college, I took a history class, and it was in a large lecture hall, and I'm sitting there, and he's just laying out the Civil War. And he's like, yeah, but he started the Civil War 200, 300 years earlier. He's like, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
this group came over here. This was why they did what they did. This was their religious belief. This was what impacted them, right? Like, those that came to Plymouth, those that settled in the North, they were very blue collar. They were like very
Yeah.
religious, freedom of religion, all of this, right? Well, these that came to the South, they were very wealth based. They were aristocratic. They were like, and he really
But they
started
couldn't
laying
own
this all out. And I'm
land
like,
in
holy
Europe.
crap, like, there's the puzzle, right? Like, why didn't I learn this when I learned US history in fifth grade? Like, the puzzle pieces fit, right? Like, it was like, okay, like, now we're seeing, okay, like, cause and effect really is a big deal, right? Like, it starts
Yeah.
early on and it trickles down, and it's within everything that we do. And like, we could go off on that, right? Like, we need to like be these change agents to change the cause and effect in a lot of things, right? Like, we talk a lot about, well, we don't talk enough about it, right? But dehumanization happens way too much in our culture, and we need to be change agents to eliminate that, right? Like, but as you look at that, right, like, to your art teacher, it was like, okay, today we're not going to learn anything, but we might find out a few things, right? Like, and then how much that stuck with you now today, where you can walk into an art, like, I crave that, right? Like, I walk into the Louvre and it's like, okay, who's this? It's like, okay, now I got to read
Yeah.
the plaque, and I'm like, what's
Everybody
the
walks into the
story
museum like,
behind
I
this,
feel this
right? Like,
obligation. I need to like, okay, I better stare at each painting one at a time and understand why it's important. I love art. Like, you'll find few people don't love art as much. And when I go into a museum, I almost run through it when I first go in. I'm just walking through to see what catches my eye,
yeah,
have spend time with it. And I'm looking to recognize pieces. And then I go back and spend time with the pieces I want to spend time with, because
I
you get worn out in 5 rooms doing it the other way. And then you won't even get to see the most amazing things.
and I usually am worn out after five. Like, I'm in the Met, right? Like, and thankfully, like, when I went to the Met last year, I had a guide,
Yeah.
a a kid that I a kid that I taught when I was serving in my mission in St. Louis, and he was living out in Brooklyn, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I go to the Met like every week. Like, why don't I just show you guys around, right?" Like, and so it was great because we got to see some of the things that we probably wouldn't have noticed otherwise, right? And so that was really neat. But still, I'm like, what's the narrative, right? Like, what's the narrative? What's going on here? Like, I wish I could understand it like you do, Damian, right? Like, because I would get so much more. Like, I've been to the Met, I've been to the Louvre, I've been to the Rijks, I've been to the d'Orsay, right? Like, but they're cool, they're awesome. Like, it's like, okay, like,
Yeah.
I've seen the Mona
I would
Lisa,
love,
right? Like, that's great, but like, what, let's really. The probably one of the coolest experiences that I had with art was when we went out to Monet's house.
Uh, Giverny.
Giverny. Yeah. And that was such a cool experience because you were just studying one artist. And so you were
Mhm.
with one artist the whole time, right? And you kind of saw the place where he created a lot of his works, right? To be able to
And you
walk his
see,
garden
yeah,
and
you
you
see these beautiful ponds, but then also to see he's painted them over the years and watch that change, how he
hmm
paints them.
yeah,
And to the point where he's so arthritic that he has to have his paintbrushes strapped to his hand, and these paintings become abstractions, but he can't, like, this passion is there. And
yeah,
then you compare your stuff to Renoir, and so many people see them as the same artist. I'm like, can't you see, like, the passion is here? And this guy was doing it for a buck, and he did it poorly. And it's like, and they're always like the same, but like they're not the same. They're so. I would love to go. There's a museum in Spain. I'd love to take you to. This will never happen, but it's the Borson Tyson, largest private collection in the world.
well, let's make it happen. Let's go.
Okay, the reason why is it's designed like every room. There's just one room is every period of art, starting from the Byzantine era, and so it's a small enough museum that you can walk through it in a couple hours, but it's like you can physically see art changing. And I can
Yeah,
talk about each step, like, okay, they finally got realism down and the technology of paint was here. And now they're like, okay, we can paint real, but what if we went outside and painted outside? And then they're like, okay, now we've captured realism, but is that really real? We're not capturing motion, and cameras exist now. So art needs to be something different. And you're seeing this happen in real time. And it's fun because it's like walking through a textbook,
that's
but
cool.
it's like dancing through the textbook instead
Yeah,
of, you know, and
I
seeing
like the
this
visual
needs
of dancing through a textbook too. Hey, we're running straight on time here. There's so many
to.
questions that I have that I didn't get to ask, but I want to run you through my kind of my rapid fire questions here as we wrap up. So prepare yourself, get ready. What
Okay.
would you say is your greatest failure, Damien?
Greatest failure was not discovering my mental health struggles earlier.
Fair.
I was so ashamed of those, and I think I missed 15 years of my life because of that, because I was embarrassed by that.
I think, like, yeah, let's advocate for that, right? Like, if we're struggling, let's talk to somebody, right? Let's discover that because there's a lot of things that we can work through, things that we can get inside ourselves and be able to do more once we figure out how to unlock that, right?
Yeah, and I funny. I've heard people like, well, I don't want to take pills for the rest of my life. I'm like, oh, but would you rather be miserable for the rest of your life? I'm like, or would you rather like realize your potential and meet your future wife and start a business and have children that are amazing? Or, be worried that I have to take a pill in the morning, you
Yeah,
know? Uh,
fair. Yeah, absolutely.
and I feel like I'm more me because I've been able to address those head on.
That's great. That's awesome. Good for you, Dame. What is your greatest accomplishment?
My family, having a family, and I felt like it was out of my control, but nothing makes me happier than having them. And
What frightens you?
vampires, vampire clowns, loneliness used to be my answer, and it's not anymore. Lonely. I was single and alone for a long time. I'm still afraid of failure. I'm not an entrepreneur by nature. I've been a part of a lot of startups, but I'm usually somebody's sidekick. I don't take those big risks.
Yeah.
And so I love to bring big ideas to somebody who's really brave and do the thing together. So I guess to some extent that goes back to loneliness. Yeah. I'm just scared of failure, because I'm not doing things the normal way. So that's scary. Like if I am out on the job market, like I'm caviar and some people think I'm fish eggs. So I got to find, I think so that scares me. Not
Yeah.
like, yeah, that's
What
big enough for me.
inspires you?
Beauty, amazing people and amazing things. Like I love being surprised and delighted by people. I, with our agency, I started out as a writer, and I was, you know, having a client choose my script was really satisfying. And now it's really inspiring, like building a team and seeing them do awesome stuff now is more exciting for me to see, like, oh, I can have an effect on people. And it's like my kids, like being surprised and delighted by things that you helped create but have a life of their own. And I encourage that, but that did its own thing.
Yeah.
And being surprised and delighted by that, that's really inspiring. I love good art and good film though too, and good TV. And it does exist.
Awesome. What gives you hope for the future?
My faith, my family. Yeah, I just think that there's always goodness in the world, no matter how bad it gets. There's always more good, and good is always, darkness isn't a power; it's just the absence of light. And I think we can carry, but yeah, we can always kindle a fire. That gives me hope, and I just feel the powers in the world, including my Creator, including God and Jesus Christ, add more light to the world, take away from it.
I think that's such a powerful thing, like adding light, right? Like bringing light, like because I think a lot of us get afraid of failure. We get afraid of the darkness, like right, like the dark, the unknown, the unexpected, right? Like, but we can always bring light. I think that's such like, yeah. I'm gonna quote that. So we can always kindle a fire, right? We can always extinguish the darkness. The nice thing is,
Yeah.
darkness can never overpower light ultimately, right? Like light will always extinguish the darkness. So
Yep.
it's just
It might
that's
be a
it is.
candle, but like the overbearing weight of darkness at night, you light a candle.
And it's
And there's a,
amazing what just one little candle can do.
yeah.
Like you can walk down into the darkest caves and you light a candle, and it's pretty amazing that one little flicker of a flame
Yeah. And
can
I don't know if
cast
you've read any
such
Cormac
flame.
McCarthy, but he can be incredibly depressing. But on the road, in the road, he just talks at the end. He talks about we're the torchbearers. And we're like, no matter how bad this world gets, you can be a torchbearer. You know, you can be a person that lights the candle, lights the torch.
Absolutely love it. What's something that you'd want to tell your 18-year-old self?
It's like these two different messages. We need to sit down and chat. Listen. We gotta sit and talk. Uh, I think I need to tell myself not to be afraid. Like I think I missed out on some big things because I was afraid. But don't be afraid. You really got to trust in yourself, because when you trust in yourself, you're also trusting in God, and like believe that. And I spent a long time not believing that, and you can do anything, but you can't do everything. So you do have to pick something. Um, and by picking that thing, you think our options are limited, but instead it opens that pathway up to the moon. So
Yeah, absolutely. What book are you reading right now?
I got 3 books that I'm supposed to be reading right now. So supposed to be reading Good to Great. I'm supposed to read No Bad Parts. My brothers have a book club, and that's, as we talked about, a fascinating idea. And The Effects of ADHD on Marriage, are all books that are fascinating to me. And and then a book written by my aunt who passed away a couple of years ago. They're all sitting on my book stand, and I'll probably find something sci-fi instead, and like keep my momentum going, and then read a self-help book. Yeah.
There you go. Hey, whatever gets that momentum rolling, right? Just
Yeah.
get
Sometimes
started.
you just have to read something fun in between to get it. Yeah.
That's the creative process. Just get started, right? Like just go.
Yeah.
What book have you read in the past 12 to 18 months that you'd highly recommend to others?
The Murderbot series. That name's going to turn you off. You think it's science fiction. It's about a robot who's trained to kill, but he just really wants to watch TV. But here's the thing. It's from this robot's perspective, and I've read The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Night Time, but I feel like this book actually has a better grasp on what it must be like to be autistic. And he calls himself Murderbot because his memory's been erased. He's done something horrible in the past, and he's trying to figure out what that is, and kind of find redemption from that. And I there's depth in that story, and it's a very fast read, and it's fun. But also, I'm going to go back to recommend what I recommended earlier, the War of Art.
Yeah,
Anybody who's interested in creativity, it'll help you get off your duff, and start reading or start creating on whatever it is you want to create. Give you some motivation and some tips to do it.
awesome. Well, I'll grab that one and I'll have to read that one here soon. What's the favorite place you've traveled in the past and why?
New Mexico. No, I actually did New Mexico this year. We had a joke. We took a bus. A friend of mine bought a bus, and we drove.
I know it's not New Mexico. I asked this question I asked the question on your favorite places to go in the US, and your first answer was anywhere but New Mexico.
Well,
So
we drove on a bus through New Mexico, and we actually went to the White Dunes and Carlsbad, which were amazing. And those would be on my top 10. But I've got no you. We decided that the state motto for New Mexico should be no thanks. But I'm sorry if you have New Mexico viewers. I was just there. And I love
it's not in my top 10, no. But
Charleston, South Carolina is one of my favorite places to visit. Honestly, it is this great fusion of history and culture, knowing that key battles in every single American conflict happened there, from Fort Sumter and the Revolution to Civil War battles happened there. You can go places where troops were. They have the oldest historical society in the country. So there's homes built in the 1600s that you can still go stay in there.
Yeah.
But there's also North and South are meeting there. So there's this fusion of foods, and I love traveling for food. And so you can eat down home, Southern cooking, fusion cooking, Southern barbecue. I love it's a great place to visit. I can't say enough about it. I also love Puerto Rico. I think a lot of people sleep on Puerto Rico. There's all these little side islands that you can go to, and we joke it's somewhere between Mexico Junior and Hawaii Light, and that's Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I need to go. My mom and sister went out just a couple weeks ago and loved it, had a great time, and so that one's on the list. But the nice thing about Puerto Rico is you don't need a passport to go there. So if you don't have a passport, like go visit go visit somewhere unique, go out to Puerto Rico. So
Yeah, and you go to San Juan, and it's older than any city in America. But then you go out to the country, and you can drive around the island in a week and see amazing places. And if you, whatever you're thinking, there's even an amazing art museum that's actually on the other end of the island from San Juan. So get out of San Juan, do some San Juan, but do some other parts of the islands, and go visit some side islands like Vieques or the island of Culebra, which is on my list, it's an island shaped like a sea, and it's primitive and gorgeous and clear water and things like that.
that's awesome. Well, Damian, where can people keep up with you or follow you?
I mean, I feel an obligation. Business, like I probably post on LinkedIn more regularly. I like friends on Facebook, but I'm always if you don't know me and I don't know anybody who knows you, better send me a nice message and I'll be happy. I like making friends. Yeah, follow me on LinkedIn is probably the best place.
Okay.
Damian Dayton. There's only one of me in the world. It's really nice for Google purpose. DamianDayton. I mean, I'm not saying like person like me, literally that spells their name like me. It's really nice. I got
There
the
is
Gmail.
there is no other person like you either, Damian. So yeah. Hey, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time, man. This was a pleasure.
No,
Thanks for coming on.
truly, I'm honored to be here.
Well, thanks everybody for joining here on A Bit of Curiosity. Subscribe, like us, follow us, jump in the conversation. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again, Damian. It was great.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.